once we understand that an efficient release of the club, or creating club head speed most efficiently, comes from the release of the club, and we understand that releasing the club effectively into the impact zone comes from a brace or kind of a super stiffening of the musculature emanating essentially from the core, we now need to be able to apply that information to effectively perform that action during the golf swing. Okay? Like everything, we can't just start by running. We have to learn how to crawl before we can walk, before we can run. The body won't just do what we're talking about because we understand it. We have to systematically teach the body in small steps and progressions to effectively coordinate the effort of stiffening or bracing and releasing the club into the impact zone. So the first thing I like to do to start to teach people a little bit about the feel is what I call water in the bucket. Now, the idea is, if you had a bucket full of water and you needed to throw this water onto a fire in front of you at some distance, you would have to accelerate the bucket dramatically, stop the bucket, and fling the water out of the bucket. If you didn't stop, brace, stop your body to throw the water or fling the water out of the bucket, you would essentially dump the water out over your shoulder. So whenever the arms start to slow down, the water will take off. If the arms accelerate all the way through the area that I need them to slow down to accelerate the implement, in this case the water out of the bucket, then they won't accelerate where I want them to, but they'll accelerate later or be mistimed. So one of the easy ways we can sort of identify the feeling of what it takes, most people can really identify to this, even if we just put a little like a golf ball or something in the bucket. You could obviously use water, but if we just use that, if we just have them swing through, the ball doesn't come out until it goes up over my shoulder. If we have them fling it down the target line, they have to brace. That feeling of brace is important. They feel it's not the arms. The tendency in the golf swing is to want to manipulate the implement, the club, with the arms. And even releasing the club, in many cases, can be more of an effort of the arms than it is the core. We need it to be the core. When you fling the bucket, you can't just do it with your arms very effectively. It has to be a whole body movement and a core stiffen. So this is a helpful drill to create a feeling for the golfer, an understanding, a proprioceptive understanding of what it's like to brace and to fling or accelerate using a kinetic link. When they do that, the one thing they're going to notice is, number one, how strongly they have to connect or kind of contract the core. But number two, in order to contract the core strongly, they have to be firmly rooted to the ground. They can't twist their foot and roll their foot and at the same time brace and contract. They have to be rooted to the ground in order to brace, contract, and throw that water or fling that water out of the bucket. So that's a good way to sort of proprioceptively start to teach the golfer what it feels like to brace and what that concept really means. Here's a couple quick things, really simple. Now the first thing I'll preface this with is that in order to really effectively teach the body how to do this, we have to know where the body breaks down. And everyone can break down a little bit differently. We always use a ZenoLink 3D motion assessment to understand what the sequence issues are so that we can more effectively go about training weaknesses in the movement and augmenting the strengths of the movement. So obviously it's a much more involved process. But there's some simple concepts that, regardless of the issues, need to be understood. And there's some simple ways that this can be applied effectively to start to teach a body how to brace, stiffen, and release the club effectively into the impact zone. I'll show you two just as an idea of how this can work. We always use an impact bag to start. It's a nice, easy way to sort of identify with the impact zone. We use a plyo club because eventually we're going to want to adjust weights, underweighted, overweighted, and also start to utilize plyometric concepts like short response and long response. We will also typically start by isolating the lower body with a Swiss ball between the knees. The reason we do this is, like I was describing when we throw the water out of the bucket, is the lower body has to be connected to the ground in order for the core to brace, or the body to brace, and to really fling or accelerate, release the club. A lot of people don't know how to connect to the ground and tend to shift, either slide laterally or spin out, come off the foot. So you'll see a lot of golfers twisting their foot or coming up on their toes. We need you to be connected to the ground. This is our cue device to sort of restrict a lot of those motions and to keep you firmly connected into the ground. Okay? So the first exercise that we can do, there's many variations and many exercises that we can employ. This is a very simple one, but a very effective one, is we first have people hold the club at a half swing orientation, arms horizontal half swing, and just drop the club into the impact zone. Just literally let it go and drop it. The reason we are doing this is, number one, most people want to manipulate the club with even the release, they try to come from the forearms. It has to come from the core. We want the forearms and the wrists to be relaxed and pliable. They're able to translate the speed more effectively if they're pliable and flexible as we get into that release zone. So allowing the arms to relax, allowing the club to just fall away from the body to begin, and really focusing on the core as the controlling mechanism is crucial. Once we have sort of developed the ability to just let the arms relax, let the club kind of fall away from the body, then we can employ some speed. So now we can hammer into the bag. Now what I just did was stop at the bag, brace and stop, and pop it away from the bag, or pop it away from the club, rather than trying to swing through the bag. The reason we do that is we start to teach the body to brace. Now obviously in the golf swing we swing through in a nice fluid motion, but right through that impact zone, as fluid as it may look to the eye, there's a ballistic contraction that happens very quickly that flings the club into the impact zone or releases it into the impact zone before you continue on. We want to systematically, progressively teach the body how to core brace. The first thing is by stopping everything and teaching people what that feels like. Then we can move away from the ball, move away from the impact bag, and complete the swing with the same feelings. But to start, we're going to want to really emphasize that brace by smacking into the bag rather than swinging through the bag. For a lot of golfers, and a lot of the golf industry, this is somewhat counterintuitive, because they think about swinging through fluidly, and they don't relate to the brace action that occurs to release the club. So one more time, we can start by just learning how to release the club away into the impact zone, and then eventually we can work speed into the equation. Okay? So that's one easy way that we can start to teach the body how to brace in a swing-related way. There's many ways that we can do it in the gym, away from the golf swing, but if we want to be very sport-specific, very activity-specific, here's some good ways that we can start to emphasize brace, release, and all the components that go into it, starting right from the connection to the ground, up through the core and the relaxation of the arms and the pliability of the arms to release the implement without trying to work and manipulate it with the forearms. Let it release. So let it release out into the impact zone. Now, another way that we can teach how to brace is by using an implement that's not rigid like a club, with a club shaft. So what we use to do this is a towel. We call these towel snaps. What we do is the same basic pattern that we just showed, but now with a less than rigid implement, which means in order to fling it, release it, I really have to focus on decelerating, bracing and decelerating, relaxing my arms. It's not an arm action, it's a core action. Relaxing and just letting that towel, or letting this less than rigid implement flow away from the body, release as a function of brace. So we'll have it just start in here, take it back, and just work on a little bitty release. This is a major core contraction, great abdominal workout, functional abdominal workout. So we're just letting that go. And now where that comes from is not the arms, but in fact the core. I'm really contracting here to be able to decelerate and fling the towel away from the body. Okay, a couple easy ones. Now, again, just learning how to do that is a skill that needs to be developed by the golfer slowly and progressively. Most golfers will, especially those who release and then reaccelerate, you'll see rather than releasing the towel, you'll see them pull the towel, all right, because they're used to using their arms all the way through the impact zone. It's really obvious then the towel lags behind. The towel's not rigid, so we can't force it to straighten. So now the arms just race off and leave the towel behind. That's what happens in their golf swing. The only difference is because the shaft is rigid, they can force the club to square up. Not efficient for creating speed and really not efficient for squaring at the impact zone. Now, once we have gotten that basic pattern down, still using the cueing, we can always add speed. But again, the speed coming from a contraction of the core, not from the arms, not from the wrists, not from the extremities, but from the core. So there's some basic ideas that we can start to use different types of exercise, especially the types that I'm showing you that are activity specific, to create the feeling of bracing. Once they've developed the ability to brace, we get rid of the Swiss ball, we get rid of the impact bag, and we work through full swing motions, but they'll feel the brace, and there's ways that we can monitor the brace during the exercise without having to stop and see it release. But there's some really simple ways that once we understand that release is the most effective way to create distal end speed or club head speed, not only power, but consistency of movement and accuracy of movement. Then we have to understand how to apply that. Well, we know that it comes from the core. We need to train the body to, in sequence and in pattern, create distal end speed, brace, fling, or release the club, and then continue on. And it happens all within a very, very small window of time, fractions of a second. It's not something that can be thought through. And even the best athletes in the world can't force themselves. They have to train. These movements are not, a conscious effort. I want to do this, therefore I can do it. They are habits. They are patterns of movement that have to be developed like any habit. First, training the body how to do it, and then enough repetitions that it becomes second nature or becomes a repeatable pattern, and then inserting that pattern into the activity of interest. And that's how we want to progress. But here's some basic ideas how we can start to learn how to brace, to release the club, and accelerate efficiently, but also with consistency and accuracy. Now, the nice thing about this stuff is that golf teaching can be employed so that we can always work on, as we're doing the exercise, work on our grip, our setup, our posture, all the stuff that is important to making sure that the club face is square as we release it, which is nice because the two can be very nicely blended, exercise and instruction into one setting.